session has sent him to the operating table. The Meta platform CEO posting on social media that he tore one of the ligaments in his knee while training for a fight early next year.
Oh
This
boy.
photo posted on Instagram shows the tech billionaire lying in a hospital bed with his left knee elevated, bandaged and fit with a brace. Zuckerberg says he was training for a competitive MMA fight. Facebook founder and Elon Musk grabbing headlines this summer after the two tech moguls seemingly agreed to an in-person face-off that never actually materialized. Now moving toward tighter regulation of artificial intelligence. As Newsnet's David
That's old news.
While some companies welcome tighter controls, others worry that stronger regulation could give the biggest names in technology the advantage.
Oh my God.
How the world lives with artificial intelligence, a major focus this week. The conversation starting here in Washington, then moving overseas.
I believe the achievements of this summit will tip the balance in favor of humanity.
An international summit held this week at a former code-breaking
Bah,
spy base
humbug.
near London.
The march vowed that any behavior deemed anti-Semitic or sympathetic toward terrorism would not be tolerated. Thousands of Iranians gathering in Tehran today to mark the anniversary of the 1979 takeover of the U.S. Embassy, chanting "Death to America and death to Israel," while condemning Washington's support of the Israeli offensive against Gaza. People assembled outside the former U.S. Embassy in Tehran, with some burning American and Israeli flags. Protesters also stomping on images of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and U.S. President Joe Biden. Others carrying banners calling the U.S. Great Satan. American diplomats and citizens were held hostage after a group of militarized Iranian college students took over the U.S. Embassy in Tehran and took them as hostages. The hostages were held for 444 days, from November 4th, 1979, until their release on January 20th, 1981. The airport in the northern German city of Hamburg closed to passengers and flights canceled after a vehicle broke through security gates. Federal police say the armed man fired twice into the air after breaking through a gate with his vehicle. Police said that later the 35-year-old man had a 4-year-old child inside the car. They believe he was the father and had taken the child by force from the mother in a potential custody battle. In Kentucky, a second man has died days after a shuttered coal plant building collapsed, trapping 2 workers. The 11-story building in Martin County was being demolished last Tuesday when it collapsed. Teams used cameras, listening devices, and search dogs to try to rescue the men. They were part of a larger crew working on the ground level of the site at the time of the collapse. They were removing material from the building to sell for scrap. On the health ministry in Gaza, the Palestinian death toll is approaching 10,000. On the ground, the Israeli military says it has surrounded Gaza City, considered the stronghold of Hamas. Several cities in Israel on high alert Saturday as another barrage of rockets fired from Gaza were intercepted by air defense systems. Thousands of Israelis gathering in Tel Aviv demanding immediate release of the hostages held by Hamas, carrying Israeli flags and pictures of captives. Hundreds of protesters joined relatives of the hostages in the demonstrations. Hundreds also gathered outside Netanyahu's official residence, calling on the Israeli leader to resign in the wake of the October 7th attack. Netanyahu says officials, including himself, will have to answer to the public, but not until after the end of the war. In Paris, thousands of protesters calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza amid the growing humanitarian crisis there. People waving Palestinian flags as they march through the streets of the French capital. The demonstrators also denouncing French President Emmanuel Macron for not calling for a ceasefire. The city's police chief authorized the march, but vowed that any behavior deemed anti-Semitic or sympathetic toward terrorism would not be tolerated. Thousands of Iranians at Arlington Auto Wrecking got creative, using a forklift to stop a criminal from stealing one of their vehicles. They realized the man was attempting to steal a car from their property and used the forklift to trap the would-be thief until police arrived. Body cam footage released by Akron Police Department shows the raised forklift holding the suspect in the stolen vehicle in midair before it was lowered and the suspect arrested. Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg's latest martial arts sparring session has sent him to the operating table. The platform CEO and mixed martial arts enthusiast posting on social media that he tore one of the ligaments in his knee while training for a fight early next year. This photo posted on Instagram shows the tech billionaire lying in a hospital bed with his left knee elevated. That is inflict with a brace. Zuckerberg says he was training for a competitive MMA fight. The Facebook founder and Elon Musk grabbing headlines this summer after the two tech moguls seemingly agreed to an in-person face-off that never actually materialized.
Which, at least according to UN documents, is the agenda to transform our world for quote-unquote sustainable development. And unbeknownst to many, many people, for the past 10 or so odd years now, this broad agenda from the United Nations has been trickling down, getting implemented as concrete policies right here in America. And so using things like the Endangered Species Act, WOTUS, the Waters of the U.S. Act, the Antiquities Act, as well as quite literally billions of dollars in federal money to either buy up land or to convince landowners to place conservation easements on their land, so it's technically still private, but you're just not allowed to develop it. Using all these different methods, the government has been taking land out of production in order to supposedly, well, save the planet. This is all part of the Biden administration's broad plan to place 30% of America's land and put it completely out of production by the year 2030. This would mean that 30% of the land would be placed into federal conservation, and it would essentially be idle. There would be no grazing, there would be no farming, no drilling, there would be no fishing, no developing, basically just no human involvement. And while the current aim is to take 30% of America's land by the year 2030, once that's actually achieved, well, the next step will be to take 50% of America's land by the year 2050. It's sort of a rolling project with the ultimate goal being for the federal government to own a majority of the land in America and to make that land inaccessible to the people in order to, again, save the planet. And while the people who live in the cities, in the urban centers, they don't really feel the effects of these policies in a visceral way, well, the people who live in the countryside, they do. They feel the encroachment of this federal government agenda on a daily basis. And so, while I was down in Texas, I took the opportunity to sit down and speak with Mr. Loren Patterson. He is a cattle rancher as well as the president of the New Mexico Cattle Growers Association. And he broke down for us the very specific methods that the government has been using to lock up America's land, the corollary devastating effects that that is having on the ranchers, and how ultimately this will all lead to the erosion of American freedom. Take a listen. Loren, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So can you sort of give us a picture of New Mexico's cattle situation? Is it like predominantly big businesses, or is it small family-owned ranches? Can you sort of?
It's predominantly small family-run business operations. So where the family is the main labor source, they're the management source, but they sweep up too. So, we do have some of the largest ranches. They're not really conglomerates, they're family ranches, but they're acreage-wise, they're some of the largest in the nation. Cattle number-wise, they're some of the largest in the nation. But predominantly, it's a family atmosphere in our industry. But agriculture bounces between the second and third largest industry in our state, and livestock production is the largest part of the ag industry.
So, you're here at the Stop 30 by 30 Summit, and I know that over in New Mexico, close to 35% of the land is owned federally, 50% of the land is owned privately, and I guess that the missing chunk, I guess state and local government would own that. What's the situation in terms of Agenda 30 by 30 in New Mexico?
So it's been a very rampant problem for New Mexico agriculture. And I say agriculture because there's multiple
It's true.
phases, not just the livestock industry that rely on that land. New Mexico is largely marginal land. It's not suited for a plow. It doesn't have irrigation. So grazing it is the best use. Grazing, recreation, but recreation and grazing can go hand in hand. So some of the 30 by 30 stuff is actually trying to take the grazing out as a multi-use purpose. And what we see is our tax base is being diminished in our rural communities because you take the cattle away, you take the tax away.
How's the government doing it? Are they just coming in and just buying up lots that are for sale?
Both. They're doing it. They passed the Land of Enchantment Fund, which is going to give them quite a bit of money to purchase rural properties, put them in conservation easements, those type of things. But then also the administrative state, we're seeing more and more regulation. Our animal numbers continue to go down and down on what we're allowed, permitted to operate on those lands. So, and then also in New Mexico, we're a high desert state, and water's life. And if you don't have the water, you don't have the life. So even for our livestock industry, we're not, as we see our water being taken away from us and taken to the urban areas or even just conserved, we lose that opportunity to operate on those lands.
I can imagine. The Land of Enchantment Fund you mentioned, can you sort of elaborate on that for someone who might have never heard of it before?
Well, so in New Mexico, it's kind of a funny situation. We the number one business in New Mexico is petroleum. We have some of the highest producing Permian Basin petroleum fields in the nation. 35% of the state budget comes from those oil royalties, but they continue to push a green agenda against the oil companies.
The Land of Enchantment Fund, is that federal funds coming to the state, and then the state is...
So it's both. The state is allocating those funds, but it also gets a federal match, whether it's through the Inflation Reduction Act or other conservation funds within. One of the ones we killed that would have put money towards it was the Recovering America's Wildlife Act. You know, we kind of got that stopped, and that was going to put $92 million a year into New Mexico to actually buy property. And to be honest, as a rancher, as agriculture businessmen and women, we cannot outbid the federal government. When they decide to buy a piece of property, it's going to leave agriculture production.
Well, which endangered species are they using predominantly in the state?
So there's one huge one, and it's been one that's been going on we've been fighting for 30 years now, and it's the Mexican gray wolf. We started out with, they were going to put out a population, and the recovery goal was 129. Well, we're looking at over 300 head of wolves now, and they will not call it a recovered species. They just keep changing the goalpost. They also keep expanding the recovery zone and what's critical habitat. So now 50% of New Mexico, the southern half, is considered critical habitat for the Mexican gray wolf. And so you cannot in any way harass those animals. I have to physically see that animal attacking one of my livestock before I can do anything about it. And then when we do have a loss due to wolves, to get the federal government to allocate money for the recovery of that animal's, the economic impact to a rancher, it's almost impossible. They keep changing the standards of what is a confirmed wolf kill. Well, they only pay the confirmed ones. They don't pay the probable kills, and they don't pay for animals that the wolves just stressed to death, which is they kill for sport. And I hate to say that. I mean, but until the ranchers are part of the recovery system for that species will never be safe. You have to bring the ranchers, the people who live in the communities, in on those recovery plans to be successful. The second one that we're really seeing a big uptick in is the lesser prairie chicken. And that would affect the eastern third of the state, and predominantly where the majority of our private land is. And so the lesser prairie chicken will drastically affect grazing permits, management of those permits. So we're going to have to manage around a species that really has had a very, very low population since the beginning of time. there just has not been a lot of lesser prairie chickens in our neck of the world, just because we don't have the water to support a wild game fowl like that. So my problem with the Endangered Species Act is very seldom do they have a baseline population to work from. They just assume that the population was better in the past. And